We are recording. Okay. So this was the beginning of Roman mythology. So if you missed this one, you were kind of playing catch up all month. You kind of didn't quite understand a couple of things. So let me backtrack a little bit. If you know where Rome is geographically located, it's pretty close to Greece. Like they're next door neighbors. Okay. It's kind of like you and I being so close to Dallas and Fort Worth, right? We could go travel to Dallas and hear a story, bring it back to Fort Worth and tell the story. So Roman mythology, like any ethnicity, they collected stories. They believed that their stories reflected their culture, their religion, their belief system. But what they did was they copied. I call them copycats. They plagiarized, really. They took stories from other cultures, namely Greek mythology. They stole all of them and they changed the names and they tweaked them just a little bit. But gentlemen, isn't that the definition of plagiarism? You take something someone else has written, you change a few things, but not enough, right? That's cheating. Like in the publishing world, that's like a punishable crime. That's a felony. So Romans had their own myths. Some of them better than others. If you did Jupiter and the Bee with me, that was a cute, clever myth. But we do owe a lot to Roman mythology. They believed in specialist gods. They had a different specialty that affected different parts of the Roman culture. So we owe a lot of our solar system, the names of the planets, to Greek mythology, Greek gods. For example, Mars was the god of war, Mercury was the god of trade, Neptune, god of sea and patron of horses. You get the point. Unlike Zeus and Hera, who often conflicted, Zeus was portrayed as kind of a practical jokester, right? He liked to go on Earth and test people. And he and his wife Hera had kind of a combative relationship. She didn't trust him, and rightly so. The difference here is Jupiter and his wife Juno in Roman mythology, and they're the counterparts of Zeus and Hera. They have a much stronger relationship. If you remember Jupiter and the Bee, Jupiter listened to his wife Juno. She advised him. We don't have that relationship between Zeus and Hera, right? Their relationship is much more confrontational. So any other thing I want to mention there? Just like any culture, the presence and influence of gods and goddesses were integral parts of Roman life. So they are polytheistic. They worship more than one god. The people of Rome built temples to their gods, observed rituals and festivals to honor and celebrate them. So any good or bad thing that happened in Roman life could be attributed to the gods. But the Roman gods were seen as caring little about the morality of the Roman people. Their chief concern was ritualistic. So that's really interesting about that. So what we're going to do today is fascinating. I'm going to prove to you, gentlemen, that the Romans stole the story from Greek mythology. Okay, so we're going to read two stories today. The first one is the original. I'm sorry, no, it's not the original. No, the first one's the copied one. This is Jupiter, Juno, and Little Io. We know it's copied because of the characters Jupiter and Juno. We know those are Roman gods. Are you ready? Okay, you're just going to listen. Jupiter was the king of all gods, ably assisted by his two brothers, Pluto, who Jupiter put in charge of the underworld, and Neptune, who Jupiter put in charge of the seas. Jupiter ruled the heavens, the earth, and all life. No god was more powerful than Jupiter. No major decision was made without Jupiter's approval. It was nice being in charge, but sometimes Jupiter found things a bit boring. Jupiter thought about what he could do. He could turn himself into an octopus, visit his brother Neptune under the sea, but he didn't feel much like a swim. He could visit Pluto under the earth, but Pluto was such a gloomy fellow. He could hurl thunderbolts, but it wasn't much fun without a target. He could hunt up one of the other gods, but truth was, All the other gods were terrified of Jupiter. He did have a terrible temper, but only when someone lied to him. Since the gods often lied, they mostly avoided Jupiter. He could call for his wife Juno, but the truth was Juno was very busy. It was nearing the day of her festival, March 1st, when all the married women in Rome celebrated her and thanked her for all she did for them. Juno was busy whispering suggestions in many a matron's ear. Jupiter almost never visited Earth, but he did watch over it. From the heavens, Jupiter spotted two men walking along a lane. Jupiter threw his voice down to Earth, making it sound like someone speaking. He was very good at that. "Hey, stupid!" Jupiter cast his voice loudly, hoping to start a fight. One man turned to the other angrily. "What did you say?" And before you could say Jupiter, the two men were fighting. Jupiter found that very funny. A glint on the river caught his eye. It was Io, a lovely river nymph. "What a lovely young woman," Jupiter said. Jupiter covered heaven and earth with some really thick clouds and brought Io up to visit him. The thick coat of clouds made Juno suspicious. Jupiter looked up. "It's Juno!" He blinked. Quickly, Jupiter changed Io into a cow. When Juno appeared by his side, all she found was an innocent-looking Jupiter standing next to a little white cow. "This little cow appeared out of nowhere," he told his wife, acting surprised. Juno wasn't fooled. "What a beautiful cow," she gushed admiringly. "May I have it as a present?" Jupiter had to agree. Juno sent the cow away under guard. Jupiter arranged for Io to be rescued and set free. He sent his son Apollo to sing the guard asleep. When the guard closed his eyes, Apollo flew Io back to her river, but he forgot to change Io back into human form. When Juno heard that Io had escaped, she sent a gadfly after Io. A gadfly is a fly that bites. "Moo, moo," Io screamed when the gadfly found her. Io swam awkwardly to the mouth of the river where it joins the sea, hoping the gadfly would not follow her. Cows are not the best of swimmers. "Moo, moo," Io screamed when the gadfly found her again. Feeling very sorry for herself, a dispirited Io traveled next to Egypt. Egypt was a dismal place for a river nymph. There are no crocodiles in the Tiber as there are in the Nile. When Juno heard about it, she decided Io had suffered enough. She flew to Egypt and changed Io back into her original form. "Thank you, Juno," Io cried humbly. "Yes, well," mumbled Juno, her mind on her festival. "Find a husband, child." She flew quickly away, leaving poor Io in Egypt. Io, after all, was a river nymph. Sighing heavily all the way home, Io swam home. Okay, so that is the Roman version. Okay, this is the version it copied from. So what I want you to listen for, gentlemen, is how is it the same? How is it a little bit different? Okay, here's the Greek version. This is the original version. The Greeks wrote the original. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades were the three sons of Cronos. When Cronos retired, the boys divided the world up between them. Zeus took the sky, Poseidon took the sea, and Hades ruled under the earth, the home of the dead. At first, it was great fun, but things had been just a bit slow lately. Zeus thought about what he could do. He could turn himself into an octopus and visit his brother Poseidon under the sea, but he didn't feel much like a swim. He could visit Hades under the earth, but Hades was such a gloomy fellow. He could hurl thunderbolts, but it wasn't much fun without a target. He could hunt up one of the other gods, but the truth was, all the other gods were terrified of Zeus. He had a terrible temper, but only when someone lied to him. Since the gods often lied, they mostly avoided Zeus. He could call for his wife Hera, but the truth was, Zeus was a little frightened of his wife Hera. He could find a beautiful woman, but he couldn't let Hera catch him. His wife Hera was very, very jealous. Zeus flew down to earth and looked around for something to do. He spotted two men walking along a lane. Zeus cast his voice to make it sound like somebody else was speaking. He was very good at that. "Hey, stupid!" Zeus cast his voice loudly, hoping to start a fight. One man turned to the other angrily. "What did you say?" And before you could say Zeus, fists were flying. Zeus found that very funny. A glint on the river caught his eye. It was Io, a lovely river nymph. "What a lovely young woman," Zeus said. He promptly fell in love. Hoping to hide himself from the eagle eye of his jealous wife, Zeus covered the world with some really thick clouds. Then he flew down to Io. But Hera was not stupid. The thick coat of clouds made her suspicious immediately. Zeus looked up. It's Hera, he gulped. Quickly, Zeus changed Io into a cow. When Hera landed, all she found was an innocent-looking Zeus standing next to a little white cow. This little cow appeared out of nowhere, he told his wife, acting surprised. Hera was not fooled. What a beautiful cow, she gushed admiringly. May I have it as a present? Not knowing what else to do, Zeus had to agree. Hera sent the cow away under guard. Zeus arranged for Io to be rescued and set free. He sent his son Apollo to sing the guard asleep. When the guard closed his eyes, Io ran away. When Hera heard about it, she sent a gadfly after Io. A gadfly is a fly that bites. Moo, moo, Io screamed when the gadfly found her. Io swam across the sea, hoping the gadfly would drown on the trip. No such luck. Although Hera did name the sea between Greece and Rome after Io. Perhaps you've heard of it, the Ionian Sea? No matter. Feeling very sorry for herself, a dispirited Io traveled next to Egypt. It was then that Hera decided that Io had suffered enough. First, she made Zeus promise he would never see Io again. Then she changed Io back into human form and left her in Egypt. Egypt was a dismal place for a river nymph. There are crocodiles in the Nile. Back in Greece, Zeus gave a big sigh. Surely there was something he could do. Okay, so gentlemen, did it seem awfully close to the original, that story? Didn't they seem a little too much alike? So I just want to caution you. There was a reason I did this. First, to kind of show you that plagiarism happens, and not just in school with kids, and every kid who walks through my door plagiarizes. Remember that copying is a wonderful form of flattery. You know, we copy something because it's really good or we really like it, right? But when you're writing something or you're using something, you have to give it credit. You have to use quotes or, say, this is the source I got it from. That's not what Roman mythology is based on. They literally pretty much stole every Greek story and put their own name on it, which is the definition of plagiarism. So I want you to go to this page, and this is the main story elements, okay? We have who here? We have two sets of characters. Obviously, we have the names in the Roman version. You have Jupiter, Pluto, Neptune, Juno. And then you have the Greek version. You have Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Hades. This is in the world of the gods, so this is in the heavens. Also on Earth. We assume it was long ago. So this myth shows the fallen nature of the gods and how they foolishly spend their time affecting innocence. What's interesting about both stories, gentlemen, is the lead god, the most powerful gods in the world, Zeus and Jupiter, were bored. And they were thinking about things to do. And they ended up playing a practical joke on someone, right? That doesn't put them in a nice light, does it? Doesn't make them look really good. Because the gods had that power to wreak havoc in others' lives, they often are selfish and they do what pleases them without thinking through their actions and how it impacts others. So the plot arc, the setup, we see both gods, Zeus and Jupiter, who rule the heavens, needed a diversion to amuse themselves. They considered turning themselves into an octopus visiting their brother, hurling thunderbolts, calling out their wives. They end up, however, seeing two travelers walking on Earth. And what did they shout out, gentlemen? In both stories, y'all can say it, you're quoting them. What did they say? Hey, stupid. Okay, don't you think that's kind of juvenile coming from an adult? I mean, what would you think if your dad said that or your mom said that? It would be kind of juvenile, right? Immature. Okay, so this is not showing the gods in a really positive light here. While looking down on Earth, both gods deliberately mess with two travelers and they cause the fight by yelling this out and throwing their voice. Okay, so that's kind of the setup. Then we have the problem. And of course, the problem involves little Io. So what I want you to notice in the story is her name is the only name not changed. Her name is the same in the Greek version. Her name is the same in the Roman version. Can either of you tell me why? You can guess. It's not complicated. Well, she's not that important, right? So every story has to have a problem. When Zeus and Jupiter spot the beautiful river nymph Io on Earth, it sets up a problem because they're trying to hide her from their wives. Remember, they both, in both stories, put up this cloud cover, right? Which ironically, gentlemen, draws the attention of their wives, Juno and Hera. So in an attempt to disguise what they're doing with the beautiful river nymph Io, they create this thick clouds and they seek out Io's attention, okay? Then we have the rising action. Hera and Juno are no fools, right? They immediately go to confront their husbands and they see a cow. Can either one of you tell me the color of the cow?
White. White.
It was white. Can anybody tell me what's the symbolism of a cow?
Isn't a cow Juno's sacred animal?
It is, and it's also an animal that has been sacrificed to the gods. It's known in many religions as a sacred animal. Yeah. Because they would sacrifice the cow and then eat it. And, you know, because it was food, right? They would do that to goats and other animals too, but you're right. So when they realize their husbands are up to no good, they ask for the cow, right? And then the husbands really are going to give it away, what they're doing, if they don't, so they agree. So this is the turning point. The wives really have the control here, right? This is that pivotal moment. They're in charge of Io's future. And you know what's really interesting? They weren't too mean to her, were they? Think about what Athena did to Arachne. Think about what was done to Echo and Narcissus in Greek versions, right? I thought they let her off the hook pretty nicely. So the falling action, Io runs away. And by the way, there's this whole plot scene where both the gods set up Pluto to sing to the guard, knowing the guard will go to sleep, so Io can make her escape. But again, the wives know, and they are ready for her escape, and they kind of follow her, and they both throw the gadflies after her. And the gadfly are flies that bite mercilessly, making her cry out. So she swims farther and farther away. That's the point. The resolution in both stories, the wives take pity on her, right? There are two different endings here, though. You know, in the Roman version, Jupiter, you know, doesn't do much, just turns her back into a human form, leaves her in Egypt and says, find a husband, child. In the Greek version, it's a little bit more complicated. She doesn't let Io go free until Zeus promises her he won't seek her out. And she names the Ionian Sea after her, which is kind of an honor, right? So she kind of acknowledges that little Io, you know, paid her penance, so to speak. The story ends well for Io, who happened to be caught in the crossfire between a disagreement between the husbands. Okay, so what are we going to do today? In November, gentlemen, this was the hardest essay because you're going to compare and contrast the two stories. Okay, so do you have your outline in front of you? Okay, so the lead and the conclusion, if I have time at the end, I'll do it. But if I just went over the story elements, it's pretty clear what that is. So here's what we're going to do. The Greek myth, notice it's in quotes, Zeus, Hera, and little Io has both obvious similarities and unique differences when compared to the Roman version of the same story, Jupiter, Juno, and little Io. So you could change that order, whichever you put them in. If you put the Greek version first, start with the Greek version every time, okay? I just did it in alphabetical order. So body one is comparing. The word comparison means similar. Okay, so when we were in class, gentlemen, and I went through the outline, I pointed out wording. So I'm going to point out some wording. And the reason is I specifically worded it so I didn't use the word similar, 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 same, 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 same. Are you with me? Okay. So when comparing two versions of the same story, there are three main important similarities. So one way both stories are the same is both Zeus and Jupiter, king of the gods, needed something to do to occupy their time. Well, what do I want there? I want what was the same in both stories. They both thought of turning themselves into an octopus. They both thought of visiting their brothers. They both thought about hurling thunderbolts. They both thought about hanging out with their wives. They both ended up seeing two travelers yelling out, "Hey, stupid," and causing a fight. I want all of that. Got it? Number two, a second way both myths mirror each other is both Zeus and Jupiter were caught by their wives who suspect the cow is a woman. So what I want here is I want you to say in both stories, the husbands, in trying to disguise their mischief, in presenting this wall of clouds, they actually drew attention to themselves, and their wives sought them out because of the clouds. And both of their wives know they're up to no good, and both of them see a white cow standing next to their husband, and they know it's a woman, and they ask her for a gift, and both husbands have no choice but to give the gift to their wives. That is the same in both stories. Do y'all agree? Okay, number three. A third example of sameness is when Io suffers in both stories. The wives set her free and return her to original form. In both stories, gentlemen, and you could explain the series here, the wives know she's going to escape, and they are ready to punish her. They send her a gadfly to bite her mercilessly. And the great thing in both stories that's the same is they took pity on her, right? That's all they did, send a gadfly, right? They could have done much worse. Agreed? They did return her to her natural form. Okay, so body two, in contrast, notice the word contrast. Readers can find three important differences in both stories. So one way both stories differ is the names. Okay, I don't just want Zeus and Hera, Jupiter and Juno. I want all of them, and all you had to do was go to the beginning of the story. Jupiter, Pluto, Neptune, and then in the other story, Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, the three sons of Kronos. Just be specific. That was a huge difference. Agreed? The names of the characters, the wives were different. A second way both myths were unique from each other is how they encountered Io. Remember, Zeus likes to go down to earth. I don't know if you noticed this in the story. He flew down to Io because once he took one look at her, he fell immediately in love with her. That was not true in the other story. He looked at her and thought she was beautiful, but Jupiter in no way fell in love with her, and he made her come to him. He did not go down to earth. Remember, Jupiter doesn't like her, right? So that was a little different in both stories. A third example is at the ending of the story. Okay. What Juno says is find a husband, child, right? She doesn't really give Io that much importance. She's punished her, she's done with her. Hera goes another step. Hera makes Zeus promise never to see Io again. And then she names the Ionian Sea after her. That's a pretty nice thing to do, right? For someone who's kind of been an innocent victim in all this. Okay, so if you go to the second paragraph, this will be the harder one. Okay, gentlemen, I named three differences. You can find any differences in there. You don't have to use mine, okay? I just want to be clear on that. On the back, there are two example paragraphs to give you an idea of what to do. The lead and the conclusion come right from the story elements, okay? Can you turn your screen off until I'm ready for your class? Thank you. Zeus and Jupiter are the gods who rule the heavens, but often need a diversion to amuse themselves. They consider many different ways to amuse themselves, even go so far as looking down on earth. Both gods deliberately mess with two travelers, calling a fight between them. So whatever you use in the lead, remember you can't use in the body paragraphs. So just keep that in mind. Do your body paragraphs first, then do the summary of the story. If you look at the conclusion, when both Hera and Juno take control over the cow, which is to say Io's future, they do everything in their power to keep Io away from their husbands. In each version of the myth, Io is sent away under the watch of a guard. Io runs away when the guard falls asleep, feeling the wrath of both the wives, Hera and Juno. Io cannot outrun, in this case, try to swim away from either of the wives, who catch her and punish her by sending a gadfly. Io then heads out to swim to Egypt, and finally Hera and Juno take pity on her. The story ends well for Io, who is released from the wives who show compassion to her by letting her go. You get the idea, right? Okay, focus your time and energy, gentlemen, on the lead and the conclusion, okay? All righty. Any questions, Srichar and Felix? Thank you for coming today, and I'm going to stop the video, okay?